Chapter 222. I won't ask much. Tell me everything that happened during the month that your young lady was in the palace. Even the small matter of how she lost a strand of hair and how she lost it, you have to tell me everything and tell me the reason. Double Happiness stood up straight. From entering the palace, Shin Yueji didn't fight for favor, Jongsun Wuyue made trouble, Jiyu Yuyin framed her, Mami Li's death, and Yushio's death. There was not the slightest bit of embellishment, but it made Shun his heart burst with joy, and he suddenly burst into laughter. Shun he stroked his beard calmly. Not bad, not bad. You are indeed my daughter. Double Happiness whispered, you can't have her without madam. Is there anything else? Oh, yes. Double Happiness immediately stood at attention. But when she said next, she was particularly cautious. She learned the rules in the palace and didn't forget to look around. Looking at her cautious look, he couldn't help but sigh. Shun he frowned and straightened her. Don't worry. This is not the palace. You know the people in our mansion. They are loyal. After Miss entered the palace, Prince Regent suddenly fell in love with Miss. He would come to Mrs. Phoenix Palace every day. Not only that, Prince Regent didn't leave at night. These words made Shun his eyes widen. To be honest, compared to Feng Joqing, he was more optimistic about the regent. Compared to Feng Joqing's harem, Mo Wuxiang didn't have a single wife in his residence. Not only that, a few days ago, an official sent 10 beauties to Mo Wuxiang. He had seen those 10 beauties with his own eyes. Which one of them wasn't a beauty that outshone the moon and the flowers? But Mo Wuxiang didn't even look at them and directly threw them into his harem. There weren't many men like him in the Feng nation who didn't lust after women. The key was that Mo Wuxiang's status was high. His status was on the same level as the emperor. When he faced the emperor, he could call himself a loner. If her daughter really had an affair with Mo Wuxiang, Shun his eyes flashed. He turned his back and thought seriously. Should he wait for Shun Yu Kai, that little bastard, to come back and have a proper discussion with him? Secretly hiding a group of troops and horses, quietly seeking refuge with the regent? Just by looking at his back, Shuangxi knew what he was thinking. She patted Shun his back. General, I think Miss is more attentive to the emperor than Prince Regent. Really? Yes. Shuangxi nodded heavily. Miss used to like the regent so much. Why did she suddenly enter the palace? He must have discovered the emperor's good side. Otherwise, he must have other plans. Since Miss chose to enter the palace, there must be something you want to do. In short, this servant feels that Miss's mind is definitely on His Majesty. Shun he waved his hand. No matter who Jia is interested in, if that brat Mo Wuxiang really has feelings for your family's young miss, then let's make preparations first. This general's daughter is so outstanding, it's not a problem to have a few more men in reserve. Oh, that's right. Go tell that fellow from the Shangguan family that your young lady has returned. Ask him to hurry over and see your young lady, Miss. Chapter 223. What do you know? Shun he couldn't help but stare at her. I want the world to see how excellent my daughter is. Who said that Jia should choose him? Do you want me to show off my daughter? It's better if good men line up. In this way, Jia can choose well. Double Happiness silently stretched out 3 fingers. General, in this case, Miss Ji has a foot on 3 boats. Shun he glanced at the 3 little claws that she had stretched out. He was about to say that he was the 3rd young master of the Qi family, but he did not say it out loud. Forget it, he would just step on 3 first. If Jia was not satisfied, he would choose a few more. When Double Happiness led a group of servants to the table with food, his strange eyes made Shin Yueji, who was talking to Shin's mother, look back several times. What's wrong with this girl? That, after being stared at by Shin Yueji for a few times, Double Happiness finally couldn't help but close his eyes. Madam, the general said not to let you talk to Miss Ji. Miss Ji will stay at home for a few days this time. If you really miss her, he will make room for you at night and let you 2 sleep. At that time, no one will care about you 2 until dawn. His words made Shin Qiu unhappy. She glanced at him coldly. Where is that old thing? Double Happiness said righteously, the general was afraid that you would beat him, so he specially asked me to tell him. After that, He ran away. The sound of Shun Qiu grinding his teeth could be heard faintly. Shun Yueji smiled and patted Shun Qiu's hand. I am relieved to see that father and mother have such a good relationship. Shun Qiu's eyes moved. He didn't answer her words. Instead, he sighed. While the food on the table was still steaming hot, he quickly picked up a piece of chicken leg and put it into her bowl. Jia loves to eat chicken legs from our mansion the most. You probably haven't eaten it since you entered the palace, right? Come, it's rare for you to come back today. I think your father must have asked the kitchen to make more for you. That big plate was filled with chicken drumsticks. Wasn't that a little too much? Shun Yueji smiled. Looking at the greasy chicken legs, she really couldn't arouse any appetite. The table was full of delicious food, but she only symbolically drank a few mouthfuls of porridge. Under Shun Qiu's expectant and disappointed eyes, she picked up a few dishes and slowly put them into her mouth. Shun Qiu could not help but let go of the tears she had just held back. She took out a handkerchief and silently wiped her tears. In the past, this daughter of hers would eat anything she saw. When had there ever been such a rule? Look at what this harem has done to her innocent, kind, and carefree daughter. Perhaps because Shun Qiu's gaze was too eye-catching, Shun Yueji looked back at her in confusion. Mother, what's wrong? You've been talking to your daughter for so long. Don't just let her eat by herself, okay? Shun Qiu felt wronged and shed tears. Her heart ached as she picked up a few more dishes for her. Mother is not hungry. It's okay, daughter. You eat, you eat. Looking at the greasy bowl, Shun Yueji really had no appetite. Seeing Shun Qiu's gaze on her body, she probably thought of something. She put down the bowl and chopsticks and smiled. After coming back from the palace, I might be a little dizzy, so I have no appetite for meat. Mother, you don't have to worry. Everything is fine in the palace. His Majesty also loves me very much. Mother is fine. Since you can't eat, then don't eat. If you really feel dizzy and uncomfortable, Mother will let the chef prepare a bowl of sour plum soup for you to relieve your discomfort. Chapter 224. Shun Yueji didn't stop her, but bowed her head thoughtfully. If Murong Yun had treated her with half of Shun Qiu's kindness, not half, even if it was 1/10 of it, she would not have ended up like this. Her hand was held by Shun Qiu. There was still a scar on her white hand. Shun Qiu looked at it and cried again. She couldn't help saying, Jia, why don't I talk to your father? We don't want the emperor anymore. Come back. There are so many good men in the world. Why should you fight for the emperor with a woman with 3,000 beauties in the harem? Don't worry, I will find you the best man in the world. He will only have you as his wife in his life. You are not allowed to have him even as a concubine. Mother, what are you talking about? The emperor treats me very well. Besides, although there are 3,000 beauties in the harem, the emperor has never touched them. Even if he doesn't touch them, there are women in the harem after all. I feel uncomfortable. Every woman uses a trick. If the emperor is schemed against, one of the women may be pregnant. Mother, being stared at by her daughter, Shun Qiu closed her mouth discontentedly. During the conversation, Shun Yueji symbolically ate a few mouthfuls of food, and finally, she couldn't eat anymore. Seeing that it was almost time, Shuangshi whispered a few words in Shun Qiu's ear. Shun Qiu's misty eyes immediately lit up. She took Shun Yueji's hand and said, Shuangshi, take your miss to the garden. Shun Yueji didn't understand what Shun Qiu was trying to do in such a hurry. She forcefully pushed her up from her seat and walked out. She looked back in confusion and asked, Mother, is there something wrong? Why are you so anxious all of a sudden? You'll know when we get to the garden. Shun Qiu smiled. Being pushed out of the room, Shun Yueji was still confused. Looking at her confused face, Shuangshi smiled and said, Miss, the eldest son of the Shangguan family is here. The eldest son of the Shangguan family? Shun Yueji was even more confused. The name of the Shangguan family was quite famous in the capital, and their business was very big. However, it was only heard of. Did the daughter of the Shun family know the people of the Shangguan family? Seeing her expression, Shuangshi knew that her young miss must be annoyed. I know that Miss doesn't like weak men like Shangguan Yu, But young Master Shangguan is so infatuated with Miss that he hasn't married yet. After knowing that Miss entered the palace, he was depressed for a long time and almost lost his life because of this. The day before her ladyship entered the palace, if it weren't for General and Madam stopping him, young Master Shangguan wouldn't have barged in. Shin Yueji held out her hand to stop her. Double Happiness was confused. Miss, since I've already entered the palace, I'm the Emperor's woman. Why did you let him into the manor? Moreover, looking at Shin Qiu's happy expression, it was clear that she wanted her to have an affair with Shangguan Yu. At the thought of this, she could not help but twitch the corner of her mouth. The Shin family was really weird. Chapter 225. That's all. Shin Yueji couldn't believe it. Shuang Shi immediately patted her chest and promised, Miss, don't you believe my words? You just need to persuade him when the time comes. After all, he is a member of the Shangguan family. The General and Master Shangguan have a good relationship. It won't be good if they become estranged because of this. In the back garden, the man was dressed in white, clean and elegant. His straight and slender figure was like a jade tree. His long black hair was casually scattered behind his head, and his exposed neck had a poetic beauty. It was fair and tender, like the skin of a baby, so delicate that it could be broken with a blow. He held a folding fan in his hand and a jade pendant on his waist. From this angle, Shin Yueji could only see half of his stunning side face. It was too beautiful to be imagined. His eyes were like black obsidian, his nose was sharp, and his lips were soft and thin. Just looking at him like this, Shin Yueji was slightly absent-minded. This man seemed to be inferior to Mo Wushang and Feng Jiuqing. But Mo Wushang and Feng Jiuqing were rare people in this world. It was a little unfair to compare him with them. Even so, this man's outstanding and handsome features were rare in this world. Shuang Shi pushed her forward and quickly waved her handkerchief. She shouted loudly to the man standing there, Young Master Shangguan, my miss is here. The man's quiet body suddenly stiffened and he suddenly turned around. His delicate and elegant face made people absent-minded. Shangguan Yu stood on the spot and looked at her for a long time. His dark and gloomy eyes gradually lit up and he quickly walked towards her. He stretched out his hand and his red lips moved slightly. With a slight tremble, he said, Gee. Finally, as if he thought of something, his bright eyes gradually dimmed. He bowed down respectfully and said, Commoner Shangguan Yu pays respect to imperial concubine. Shin Yueji just stared at him for a while. Even when he knelt down for such a long time, she didn't take the initiative to help him. Miss, you can't bully young Master Shangguan anymore. Shuang Shi moved closer to her ear and whispered. As for Shangguan Yu, Shuang Shi felt sorry for him. He had chased after her miss for so long, but her miss had been cold and indifferent at the beginning. In the end, she was so annoyed that she directly whipped him. Shangguan Yu could be said to be the most pitiful man. He had been insulted and beaten countless times by her miss, but he still did not know to give up and followed her. Shuang Shi's reminder brought Shin Yueji back to her senses. Oh! She personally bent down and helped him up from the ground. You don't have to kneel. I'm in the mansion now, and there aren't many rules. Shin Yueji didn't know if it was an illusion, but the moment she helped him up, she clearly saw a flash of surprise on Shangguan Yu's face. That flattered expression, his face was a little pale, and his handsome face was filled with fatigue. Presumably, it was caused by the decadence of these days. Even if he came today, he had deliberately taken care of himself, but his body did not have the aura of a living person. One could imagine what kind of torture this man had experienced before. No matter how one looked at it, such a man was undoubtedly outstanding. The reason why Shin Yueji looked at him absent-mindedly was that why Shin Yueji didn't like him. Such a gentle and affectionate man who was infatuated with her. If it was anyone else, they wouldn't be able to reject and hate him, right? Chapter 226. Thinking of this, Shin Yueji shook her head again. This was difficult. She was Jiyu Yuqin now, not herself. Facing such a man, she felt very strange. She really didn't know what to say. Especially when she met his expectant eyes, he had a lot of things to say to her. And she She didn't feel anything at all. Well, ahem. She covered her lips and coughed softly. Seeing this, Shangguan Yu immediately took off his outer robe and put it on her. Lady Ji, you're wearing thin clothes. Be careful not to catch a cold. The strange smell of a man on his body was fragrant and had the refreshing smell of books. It wasn't unpleasant, but Shen Yueji felt uncomfortable. Child Shangguan, are you here to visit my father? Hearing this, Double Happiness's face immediately darkened. Shangguan Yu was taken aback. After a long time, his lips moved and he said mockingly, Lady Ji has never been so distant to me before. He knew that Shen Yueji didn't like him. She used to call him by his full name with disgust. Although her tone was fierce and full of disgust, at least he knew that she didn't like him, but she was willing to vent her anger on him. But now Shen Yueji, she was so distant and emotionless. She called him Child Shangguan like a stranger. Child Shangguan? Seeing that he didn't respond, Shen Yueji called him again. Shangguan Yu came to his senses and gave a pale smile. Miss, what can Child Shangguan say to the general? Of course, he knows that you're back, so he came to visit you. And Shuang, she looked at Shangguan Yu. This time, young lady and His Majesty returned to the mansion incognito. Young Master Shangguan, you don't have to follow so many rules. Just call young lady Ji just like before. Shen Yueji knew that Double Happiness was talkative, but she didn't expect this girl to be so talkative. Shen Yueji rolled her eyes at her. Forget it. Double Happiness is right. Child Shangguan, you can call me how you used to call me. Hearing this, Shangguan Yu's face lit up. He called her gently, Ji Shen Yueji didn't want to respond. She only felt that this gentleness made her very uncomfortable. She consciously changed the topic. Child Shangguan, do you have something to say to me? Shangguan Yu opened his mouth and hesitated. Shen Yueji quietly waited for him for a while before she heard him say, Has Jia been well in the palace for over a month? Hearing this, Shen Yueji suddenly smiled. Of course it's good. The emperor treats me very well. Did young Master Shangguan not see it? Even when I left the palace, he was worried that I would be framed, so he brought me back to the general's mansion first. With every word she said, Shangguan Yu's face became paler, and in the end, he was completely bloodless. Shen Yueji didn't care at all. She continued, Life in the palace is much better than in the mansion. Everything is of the highest quality. The concubines in the palace know my identity, and they strive to curry favor with me. No one dares to disrespect me. To me, life in the palace is much better than life in the mansion. Sir Shangguan. Double Happiness cried out in surprise. Shangguan Yu's figure was in a mess. His straight and slender body suddenly fell backward, as if he was going to fall to the ground. Shuangshi reacted quickly and reached out to grab him. Looking at his pale face, his black eyes were filled with regret and pain. Chapter 227. Shen Yueji stared at her. She couldn't even deal with Mo Wushang now. If Shangguan Yu appeared, wouldn't it cause trouble for her? Besides, Shangguan Yu liked her, not her. Since she couldn't give Shangguan Yu what he wanted, it was better to cut off this relationship early, so as not to delay his life. Shuangshi had always been smart. Why couldn't she understand what she was thinking? Jia likes to eat Liu Ji's Osmanthus cake. I haven't been back to the capital for more than a month. The capital has changed a lot. How about I take you to the capital? After calming himself down, Shangguan Yu forced a smile and looked at Shen Yueji. He was afraid that she would say no. Shen Yueji really wanted to say no. Liu Ji's couple has been waiting for Ji Shangguan Yu spoke first. Miss, have you forgotten? Liu Ji's Osmanthus cake business in the capital was almost closed. It was you and young Master Shangguan who sponsored them and protected them from being bullied by the people in the capital. Shen Yueji still had some impression of this through her own memory. Secondly, she had always wanted to see the scenery of the capital. When she left the palace with Feng Jiuqing, she wanted to have a good look. But if the other party was Shangguan Yu, she was a little hesitant. No one knows the scenery of the capital better than me. My Shangguan family has been doing business in the capital and has been to all kinds of places. Although Jia has traveled all over the capital, there are many new interesting places in the past month. I can introduce them to Jia one by one. If Jia doesn't want to see my face, Shangguan Yu's bright eyes gradually dimmed. At that time, I can also wear a mask and lead the way for Jia. If Shen Yueji continued to refuse him, it would seem that she had gone too far. She looked at him and smiled. Young Master Shangguan, what are you talking about? In that case, please lead the way. But, she hesitated. I just came back from the palace. I've been traveling all the way and I want to take a bath first. Shangguan Yu's handsome face blushed. He looked away unnaturally and said softly, okay, then I'll wait for Jia here. Do you think I don't have enough trouble? Another trouble for me? After leaving the back garden, Shen Yueji couldn't help but pull Shuangshi's ear and scold him. Shuangshi covered her ear that was being pulled and said pitifully, Miss, you can't blame this servant. I don't blame you. Shen Yueji sneered. Shuangshi nodded. That's right. Everyone in the capital knows that the eldest young master of the Shangguan family is infatuated with you. He has been following behind you since he was very young. You can't even chase him away. No matter how you hit, scold, or humiliate him, young Master Shangguan will always look at you with a smile on his face. He has never complained. Which man in this world doesn't have some self-esteem? Miss has treated young Master Shangguan so excessively, but he still loves you. Chapter 228. Double Happiness's words stirred a lot of emotions in Shen Yueji's heart. She opened her mouth and wanted to ask, since he is so infatuated, then why didn't Shen Yueji have any feelings for him? How many people in this world could compare with Shangguan Yu's elegant and peerless face? It's all because of you, miss. You've always treated the Prince Regent as your god. You hate those weak and bookish scholars the most. You think you can beat them to death with a whip. Why would you care about eldest young Master Shangguan? Shuangshi grumbled and tugged at her sleeve. Your ladyship, Master Shangguan is actually quite pitiful. You should look at him a few more times. Even if you can't be with him, it's still better than bullying and beating him every day. Madam and the general love you so much that sometimes they can't bear to see Miss hit young Master Shangguan. Shen Yueji's mouth twitched. This was probably why Shen Qiu was so happy after hearing the news of his arrival. A man who liked and tolerated their daughter so much was rare in this world. In their hearts, Shangguan Yu was the most suitable son-in-law. But it was a pity. While taking a bath, Shen Yueji asked Double Happiness to tell Shen Qiu that she wanted to go to the capital, but she didn't say who she was going with. According to Double Happiness's words, she was afraid that he would tell Shen Qiu which man she was going with. When Shen Yueji came out of the room after taking a bath, she saw Double Happiness standing outside the door with a big bag in her arms, looking at her eagerly. Looking at the big bag in Double Happiness's arms, Shen Yueji frowned. What are you holding in your arms? Silver. Double Happiness looked at her. Madam knows that Miss is going to the capital, so she specially asked me to carry silver with me, so that you don't lack silver when you buy things. Looking at the thick bag, just this amount of silver was enough to feed a village of extravagant food and clothing expenses, right? She stared at Double Happiness for a long time. I don't lack anything. I'm just strolling around. If there's anything I like to eat, it won't cost much. Aren't you tired from bringing so much money with you? No, I'm not tired. No one will dislike having too much silver. Don't worry, miss, this servant won't feel tired even if I carry it for a whole day. Shen Yueji was speechless and could only let her be. In the back garden the man was still standing there. During the time she had been gone, he had not moved a single step. Seeing her return, Shangguan Yu's fair face lit up with joy, and he stepped forward to welcome her. Jia, you're back. Because she had just taken a bath, there was a very nice fragrance on her body. Her hair was still a little wet, and she was clean without any makeup. She was breathtakingly beautiful, especially her pair of crystal grape-like eyes, which made people feel dejected. Shangguan Yu stared at her for a long time. In the end, it was Shen Yueji who spoke first. Let's go. After all, she was already the emperor's woman, so the two of them shouldn't be sharing the same carriage to avoid suspicion. However, she didn't know what Shen Qiu and the others were thinking. It seemed like they wanted to match them up, so they squeezed them into the same carriage. Chapter 229. During this period, after sitting in the carriage, Shinyueji leaned far away on the right side and picked up a book to read. The carriage was not very spacious. Their breaths were intertwined. In the quiet carriage, they could clearly hear their light breathing. Just as Shinyueji read the book carefully, the man looked at her carefully. After many times, Shinyueji finally couldn't bear it anymore. She put down the book lightly and looked at the man beside her. "Child Shangwon, is there something on my face?" Understanding what she meant, Shangwon Yu awkwardly looked away, lifted the curtain, and looked out of the carriage. "Jia, have you always looked down on me?" "What? No." Shangwon Yu laughed self-deprecatingly and looked back at her. "Jia comes from a family of generals, so the one you despise the most is." "I never said that I hate you. Have you ever heard of a saying, Child Shangwon?" Without looking at the happy expression on the man's face, Shinyueji said lightly, "In this world, not all feelings are paid back. Liking a person is not to pester her and make her dissatisfied with you, but you don't know how to retreat. I don't hate scholars, but those who know that this person is not a good match for you, but still make a meaningless struggle and resistance." Shinyueji's indifferent words made the man's thin body stiffen. "Child Shangwon, you have a good family background, good appearance, and good knowledge. You are superior in all aspects. With such an identity, what kind of woman can't you get? Moreover, I've also heard that many of the daughters of aristocratic families are infatuated with young Master Shangwon, and they're willing to use their entire lives to wait for you. Is Jia persuading me to let go?" Shangwon Yu's dark eyes flashed with endless pain. In the past, she beat him, scolded him, and humiliated him. But he still went his own way. He was willing to be beaten and scolded by her, and he wanted to follow her and pester her, so that he could see her and she could see him. Even if her eyes were filled with disgust, hatred, dissatisfaction, and even anger. But Shangwon Yu was happy in his heart. Seeing her again today, she was very different from before. Although it had only been a short month, he felt that she had changed a lot. She was no longer arrogant and despotic like before. The way she did things and spoke had changed a lot. Perhaps, this was what she was like after entering the palace. He felt sorry for her and loved her. He thought that she must have suffered a lot of bullying and grievances after entering the palace. That was why she became like this. Shangwon Yu was happy that she could calm down and talk to him, but not after all the difficulties she had gone through. Her simple and domineering claws had all been smoothed out. "Jia," he called her softly. "Do you know that I've been working hard to live the way you like? I've been working hard. As long as I think of you, I feel that all the hardships and tiredness I've experienced are worth it." But why? His heart felt like it was being torn apart, and it was so painful that he almost couldn't breathe. He looked at Shinyueji's beautiful face, which was familiar and strange at the same time. He didn't know how many times this face had appeared in his dreams. He fantasized that one day, she would fall in love with him and be his bride. He had been waiting for himself to become stronger, to make himself work harder, but she suddenly entered the palace. He was caught off guard, and he couldn't accept it. Chapter 230. He became seriously ill. After knowing that she had entered the palace to become the emperor's woman, his illness never recovered. He couldn't eat anything and coughed up blood every day. Even the doctor said that he wouldn't live for long. He wanted to see her for the last time before he died, but he felt that he couldn't live through that day. Who knew that she would suddenly return to the Fu? After hearing this news, it was as if he had just recovered from a serious illness. He cleaned up the mess that he had been in for over a month. He soaked in the water for a long time. He was afraid that the stench from his body would make her sick. He cheered himself up to see her, to see the person who made him yearn for day and night. He thought that she would still be the same as before. She didn't like him, didn't want to see him, insulted him, and hit him. But she changed. Not only did she not hit him, but she didn't scold him. Even the way she looked at him was different from before. She used to hate him, but now she didn't hide it. His heart was throbbing. He wanted to reach out and grab her little hand that was hanging over her skirt, but the moment he was about to touch her hand, she quietly put her hand on the coffee table, picked up a piece of pastry and put it in her mouth, then calmly picked up the book on the side of the table to read. His chest was filled with sorrow. He suddenly smiled in a depressed tone, but he forced a smile. Now, do you even want to take back the right that I like you? Child Shangguan is the only legitimate son of the Shangguan family. Your Shangguan family's property will fall on you in the future. If you don't get married, not to mention that the Shangguan family's descendants will be cut off in your generation, even your Shangguan family will fall on when the two elders are old in the future. Jia, after so many years, you still don't understand me. Stop the carriage in front. The street in front is busy. Let's walk there. As soon as the man spoke, Shen Yueji ordered the groom outside. Shangguan Yu swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue bitterly. Seeing Shen Yueji get off the carriage, he hurriedly reached out to help her. After all, he was a step late. He glanced at the empty hand, smiled bitterly, and got off the carriage. The streets of the capital seemed to be a lot livelier than she remembered. Shen Yueji walked in front and looked at the hawkers and stalls on both sides of the street. There were people coming and going, and lively and cute children running around because of some food. Giggling and bargaining sounds. There were also many peddlers who were quarreling over trivial matters. Yo, little beauty, are you going to sell yourself after your father dies? At this time, she heard a man's sharp voice. Shen Yueji turned her head to look and saw a fat middle-aged man standing beside a young girl in tattered clothes kneeling on the ground. He saw the young girl kneeling on the ground with a corpse wrapped in a straw mat beside her. On the cloth in front of her, the words "selling my body to bury my father" were written in large characters. Such incidents were not uncommon in the capital. Under the management of Feng Jiuqing, there were fewer and fewer people like this in the Feng nation. After watching for a while, she lost her interest. If it was in the past, she might be kind to this young girl and give her some money so that she could leave after burying her father and find a place to start a small business. But now, she just watched coldly from the side, especially when the fat man stretched his hand to her chest and touched her body unscrupulously in front of everyone. Chapter 231. Shuang. She hated this kind of man. She wanted to teach him a lesson, but seeing that her miss didn't say anything, she glared at him fiercely and didn't step forward. Well, her chest is too small. It's not even enough to fill the gap between my teeth. It's just a little girl. It's a loss to buy her. The fat man groped all over her body, his face full of disgust. Finally, his gaze froze, and his lecherous gaze fell on her lower body. His disgusting large hands slid down to her legs, spreading them wide open. The girl swallowed her anger and didn't dare to move. The middle of the road began to be surrounded by passers-by. Perhaps because they were afraid of the fat man's identity, they coldly watched from the side. No one stood up to stop him, and some laughed at the girl's wanton behavior. Feeling the people around pointing at her, they all looked down on this girl. Low, dirty, disgusting, abusive, all kinds of voices intertwined together, all pointing at the girl. Shangguan Yu's white face alternated between green and white, extremely ugly. He was about to step forward. I don't want to meddle in these things, and I don't want the people around me to meddle. A cold voice rang in his ears. He paused and turned around to look at Shen Yueji. Shen Yueji looked back at him. To be precise, I don't want to disturb my mood of shopping because of this. If young Master Shangguan wants to meddle, then do it. We'll say goodbye here. Jia. Shangguan Yu was shocked. Seeing that she had indifferently turned and left, he no longer looked at the girl who was being bullied and quickly caught up with her. If Jia doesn't like to be disturbed, then I don't care. He walked in front of her and stopped her. His voice was sincere and his expression was serious. Shen Yueji passed him and walked a few steps forward. The man followed closely, as if he knew that he had just done something wrong. He just silently followed her and didn't speak again. Do you know why I didn't save her? Shangguan Yu shook his head. Shen Yueji smiled. You can't even take care of your own mess, so why bother to meddle in other people's business? This kind of thing happens every day in this world. You are not a savior, so why should you be merciful and save them? Also, can you guarantee that the person you save will be loyal to you and not an ingrate? Shangguan Yu was puzzled by her words. He felt that he didn't know Shen Yueji at all. Jia, what's wrong? She's still a young girl. She's being disrespected and humiliated by a man in front of everyone. With so many people pointing at her and gossiping about her, do you think it's possible for Master Shangguan to do the same? Shangguan Yu was stunned when he heard this, and he seemed to have recalled the scene of the young girl being too calm. Shen Yueji smiled faintly. They said that he was killed by selling his father, but the man wrapped in the mat was covered in wounds of different sizes. It didn't look like he was beaten up. The wounds on his body weren't deep, but they weren't heavy either. The densely packed strangulation marks were something that only a little girl would have. There are whip marks on his exposed legs. If it was a man, the force would have been heavy and deep. However, the strength of the whip is clearly just a superficial wound. It is obvious that it was caused by a woman. Chapter 232. Hearing that she mentioned the past again, Shangguan Yu smiled and said, "Yes, Jia hit me, but it didn't hurt at all. It was false that it didn't hurt. Only love was real. With love, whatever Shen Yueji did, he would feel that she loved him and looked lovely. If there was no love, it would be hatred that could be remembered for a lifetime." "Miss, do you mean that there's something wrong with the little girl?" Double Happiness, who was behind her, also realized that something was wrong from Shen Yueji's words and asked. "The little girl is indeed a little girl. There's nothing wrong with her, but her temperament is different." "Temperament?" Shen Yueji walked in front and lightly said, "The man wrapped in the mat tube died not long ago. Not only are there whip wounds on his exposed legs, but they are also white and bony. It's obvious that this person was seriously ill when he was alive and didn't have enough to eat. It's normal for homeless people like them to not have food to eat, and it's normal for them to die of illness. However, the scars on his body prove that he was beaten to death while he was still breathing. During his illness, he also suffered inhumane torture." "Miss, do you mean that the person who beat him and killed him is that little girl?" This was too unbelievable. Didn't the little girl sell herself to bury her father? To be able to list out such a piece of cloth, it was enough to show how filial she was to her father. If it was really as her young miss had said, that her father had been tortured by her when he was alive and beaten to death by her before he died, then this little girl was too scheming, wasn't she? She had no one to rely on in the capital city. Although it was easy for a woman to get married and be chosen as a concubine with some beauty, she didn't have a good reputation. If she was a master of a big family, she would only end up with a reputation of being robbed. But this little girl sold herself to bury her father and became a concubine of a rich family with filial piety. In the future, no matter whether she was favored or not, after being bullied by superior wives and concubines, she could pretend to be pitiful to win the master's sympathy. Speaking of this, Shen Yueji seemed to think of something and laughed self-mockingly. "Don't you men all like beautiful, gentle, and dependent women?" Hearing the sarcasm in her tone, Shangguan Yu didn't understand, but he still refuted, "He's just someone else. You know if he liked this kind of woman, he would have married someone else long ago. How could he have been bullied by her for so many years, and his heart still hadn't wavered? What he liked was Shen Yueji's arrogance and despotic attitude, and how she would bare her fangs and brandish her claws when she bullied him. This is also the reason why I am not willing to help her. If I give her a sum of money and she sees that I am well dressed, she will definitely not give up. In the name of serving me for the rest of her life, I don't know what she is scheming behind my back. Maybe when I bring her into the palace and she sees the emperor, she will have the thought of transforming into a phoenix. Who knows, if I leave her in the general's mansion, she might be able to climb into my father's bed without my father knowing." Shen Yueji smiled. There are pitifully few people in this world who are clear-minded. If that person is willing to throw away his life and serve her loyally just to save her, then wouldn't there be a river of such people by my side? Her hand was held by the man. Chapter 233. But Shangguan Yu held her so tightly that she couldn't break free at all. Shen Yueji stared at him coldly. "Young Master Shangguan, this is the capital. There are so many people coming and going here and there. There are bound to be people who know us. If this matter is seen by someone who knows us, They will spread rumors. My matter is a small matter, but if your Shangguan family is implicated because of this. Jia, you know I'm not afraid of these things. What kind of grievances have you suffered these past few days? What happened? Why did you become like this? I know I can't help you. You don't like me. But I hope you can take me as a friend to talk to. Tell me your difficulties and what's on your mind. Don't keep it in your heart. Trust me, okay? Even if everyone else can betray you, only I won't. Shen Yueji had never been like this in the past. Shangguan Yu could vaguely guess that she must have been bullied by someone just from the distant and strange way of addressing her. She was proud and would never be willing to swallow her anger. But now she had to do this. His heart throbbed with pain. He knew that the Emperor's harem was a dangerous place. Even if she had a powerful backer, her pride had long been ground away by the cruel place in the harem. At the thought of the women he loved and the grievances they had suffered in the harem, Shangguan Yu couldn't help but feel upset. He hated himself for not becoming stronger. If he were stronger, would he be qualified to stand by Jia's side and protect her? The man's eyes were so sincere that Shen Yueji wanted to avoid them many times, but his eyes seemed to be glued to her. She sighed in her heart and looked not far away. She saw a piece of cloth next to a simple house not far away, on which the words Liu Ji Osman thus cake were written. Double happiness. She called out. Double happiness answered and walked in front of her. Miss, what's wrong? Buy some Osman thus cake. Whether it was herself or her former self, they both seemed to have a special love for Osman thus cake. Double happiness hurriedly agreed, and with a bag full of silver, he jogged away. Shangguan Yu was about to stop her, intending to buy it for her himself. But after double happiness left, there were only the two of them left. Out of selfishness, he smiled slightly to cover up his gaffe and did not say anything. Looking at double happiness who was queuing up, Shen Yueji couldn't help but say, look at this small place. It's not as clean as other shops, but there are so many people. Maybe it's because this couple is honest. The man chuckled and continued her words. Shen Yueji looked back at him. It was true that the food he gave was never short of weight. Compared with other Osman thus pastry shops, their food was much more affordable and delicious. Seeing this, Shen Yueji seemed to recall the Osman thus cake shop that she once ate at. They were also an old couple. Ever since she married Feng Joqing, she had never seen them again. Perhaps it was just as he had said. Their family saw that they were getting old and couldn't bear for them to go out and run about, so they let them live out the rest of their days at home. Jia, come here. Suddenly, her hand was caught by the man. The warmth from the man's palm shocked Shen Yueji. Before she could speak, she was pulled into a narrow alley by the man. What's wrong? Someone is following us. Chapter 234. Jia, remember to stay here and don't run around. I'll be back soon. This narrow alley was not big and seemed to be safe. Shangguan Yu said a few words to her and then turned to leave. This man was really good at hiding things. Shen Yueji looked at his back as he left. It was not difficult to ignore the strong murderous aura that filled the air at that moment. He knew martial arts, and at a very high level. According to her own memory, Shangguan Yu did not seem to know martial arts at all. Shen Yueji took a step back and leaned against the wall. She did not know if there was anyone following them, but she could not be more familiar with a person. From the moment he came, she had sensed it. She narrowed her eyes, crossed her arms, and glanced at the deserted alley. Come out. Mo Wushang, dressed in a black robe, descended from the sky like a god. His handsome face was stained with layers of coldness at this moment. His pair of cold eyes, as if frozen, fell on Shen Yueji's indifferent face without blinking. He glanced at her and very naturally walked in front of Shen Yueji. He stretched out his hand and pulled her into his arms. He said in a muffled voice, "You are not allowed to hang out with other men. To be honest, I really did not intend to hang out with this man. You have been here for so long. Do you know who the people following us are?" Shen Yueji let him hug her as she poked his hard chest with her finger. She was not surprised to see Mo Wushang. His mansion was in the capital. After she returned to the mansion, he naturally returned to his Prince Regent's mansion. If he wanted to see her, it would be easier than entering the palace. Although Shin Yueji only discovered this after returning to the mansion. It's people from the Jiyu family. Jiyu family? Shin Yueji quickly understood the meaning of these 5 simple words. She narrowed her eyes. Jiyu family? They know that I left the mansion so quickly? From the palace to the capital, it only took a few hours. If it was the Jiyu family, according to Jiyu Wei's means, he would not directly order people to secretly follow her to hurt her. Was it Jiyu Yuyin? Other than Jiyu Yuyin, Shin Yueji couldn't think of anyone else in the Jiyu family who could be so fast to send someone to follow her so quickly. Shin Yueji had guessed that Jiyu Yuyin wouldn't obediently swallow her anger after Feng Zhouqing took her out of the palace this time. This was out of Shin Yueji's expectations. Why was she so impatient? As if she had thought of something, Shin Yueji suddenly smiled. Meeting the man's eyes, she opened her mouth. It's rare for me to leave the palace this time. I really can't stay in the general's mansion as the emperor wishes, don't you think so, Regent? The man's eyes flickered. He pinched her chin and rubbed his fingers against her smooth chin. Actually, you can also live in my residence. This man, can't you think of something good in your head? Slapping his hand away, Shin Yueji couldn't help but kick him. The man didn't dodge and let her kick him. Shin Yueji kicked him, but her anger was still not appeased. She pulled his hand over and bit down hard on it, until she saw rows of teeth marks on the back of his hand. She licked her lips and stared at him for a long time. Does it hurt? Mo Wushang shook his head. His round fingers touched her lips again, and his black eyes brightened. Live with me? No, what would it be like to live with you? I am the emperor's concubine. Besides, father and mother will not agree. Chapter 235. Shin Yueji had a headache and held her forehead. She had no doubt that her 2 weird parents must be in a hurry to let her live with Mo Wushang. The problem was, it was hard for them to let her, a woman, deal with so many men. How much effort did they have? How is my second brother's matter going? If nothing goes wrong, he will return to the capital tonight. Tonight? Shin Yueji smiled and nodded. So, I will see Li Yingying soon? Li Yingying? The man raised his eyebrows. Shin Yueji deliberately kept him guessing, as if thinking of something funny. When do you plan to return to the mansion? I will be with you. I will stay in the mansion for a few days. You can come to see me at any time. I just said, when do you plan to return today? Looking at the man's dissatisfied expression, Shin Yueji's mouth twitched. Are you going to stick to me for a few days? Miss Shuangxi's worried voice suddenly came from outside. Here. Shin Yueji waved at her. Seeing her, Shuangxi quickly ran towards her with the osmanthus cake and a bag of silver. Regent. As she approached, she found that Shangguan Yu who was standing next to her miss had become Mo Wushang. Her little face, which was full of joy, immediately changed color. Well, Regent, I pay my respects to Regent. Mo Wushang didn't look at her, but took the osmanthus cake in her hand, took a piece and put it to Shin Yueji's mouth. Shin Yueji's little heart was beating fast. She opened her mouth and took a bite. It was sweet but not greasy. When she was about to take a second bite, he had already opened his mouth and threw the half she had bitten into his mouth. She covered her mouth and coughed awkwardly. Don't worry, someone is following us. Young Master Shangguan is going to deal with them. Ah! Shuangxi blinked. But miss, young Master Shangguan doesn't know martial arts. I didn't feel the existence of those people who are secretly following us. They must be very good at martial arts. Will young Master Shangguan be in trouble if he goes to find them? He doesn't know martial arts. Shin Yueji looked at him. Do you know him very well? In my opinion, his martial arts are not weak. Just as Double Happiness said, she did not know that someone was following her. Even she did not feel it. One could imagine how high Shangguan Yu's martial arts were. Shuangxi still wanted to say something, but the man shot her a cold look. Are you very free? These cold, simple, and concise words made Double Happiness shiver. He quickly shook his head. No, I'm not idle. I'm very, very busy. Miss, Do you and the Prince Regent want to go to the tea house in the opposite room? When did I say that? The Phoenix tea house opposite is where Miss used to like to sit. The place is spacious, soft and comfortable, and there are a lot of dishes. Shuangxi hugged the heavy silver. Miss is not in a hurry. Anyway, the capital is so big, you won't be able to finish shopping in a short amount of time. Also, Miss has stayed in the Fu for 3 to 4 days. Since you just returned to the capital, you should rest first and recover your energy before going shopping. Isn't that right, son-in-law? With that, she didn't forget to glance at Mo Wushang and even changed the way she addressed him. Shun Yueji. Chapter 236. Shuangxi was overjoyed. Her hands that were holding the silver were trembling. After a long time, she squeezed out a sentence excitedly. Thank you, young master. No, Shun Yueji was upset. She wanted to say something, but the man had already carried her off the ground. She glanced at Shuangxi, who was so happy that she was about to ascend to heaven. With a gloomy face, he said, I say, that silver was given to me by my parents. When did it become yours? What's yours is mine. What about yours? What's mine is yours. As the regent of the Feng nation, Mo Wushang did not only have great power, but also wealth that could rival a nation. The problem was, Shun Yueji was still conflicted about the big bag of silver in Shuangxi's arms. Do you know that the silver in her arms is enough to feed a small village for a lifetime? Moreover, it's the kind that eats meat every day and wears silk. Perhaps it was because of her seriousness that the man's dark eyes fell on her and he listened to her seriously. Grabbing his collar with both hands, Shun Yueji said seriously, Shuangxi serves me. Not only does my parents give her benefits, but even I give her silver on time every month. Sometimes, I give her the jewelry that I don't want. Look at my jewelry, which one of them isn't expensive? I'm not stingy and give them all to her. She has already taken a lot of benefits from me. You are my man. You can't be partial to her. Give her all the silver that my parents gave me. This way, she won't be loyal to me. She mumbled. Realizing that something was wrong, the man's handsome face suddenly moved closer to her. Her lips felt warm. The man sucked on her delicate lips and nibbled a few times. Then, Shun Yueji felt herself falling rapidly in his arms. On the other side, Shuangxi was holding a bag full of silver and seeing stars. She took a silver ingot and put it in her mouth and bit it hard. She was extremely excited. The next second, a cold wind blew and her vision went black. After a while, her vision cleared up, but before she could see clearly who it was, the big bag of silver in her arms was gone just like that. She looked down in horror. Where was the silver? Where was the silver? She opened her mouth wide in surprise. The smile and pride on her face were still frozen on her face, and she didn't have time to change her expression. Silver. Returning to mid-air, Shun Yueji happily reached out towards Mo Wushang, wanting to take back the bag of silver. In the end, he casually tossed the bag of silver onto the ground. The passers-by on the street saw it and immediately snatched it up in a frenzy. Soon, it was all gone, leaving behind a lonely piece of cloth. Without the weight of the silver, it fluttered in the wind. Her trembling hands climbed onto the man's chest. Mo Wushang was puzzled by her sudden malevolent expression. Shun Yueji angrily gnawed and bit his exposed neck. The man's pitch-black eyes flickered with lust. He tightened his grip on her waist and said in a hoarse voice, don't rush, don't worry your grandpa. She only said that it was a pity to give so much money to Shuangxi, and asked him to take it back and return it to her. In the end, he just threw it all to the people below. He might as well give it all to Shuangxi. Shun Yueji's breath was stuck in her throat, and she couldn't breathe for a long time. Put me down. What's wrong? Put me down. Mo Wushang didn't know how he had offended her and was a little flustered. Are you going to put me down or not? Mo Wushang, I'm telling you. Chapter 237. The man's big hand froze and landed on a roof with her in his arms. His deep eyes were locked on her little face that was filled with anger. He pursed his red lips and did not say a word. Shun Yueji was just about to go down when she glanced at the people on the street. With such a high roof, One could have a panoramic view of the capital city. Her little face darkened. Obviously, Mo Wushang had put her at the highest place. Big brother is going back to the mansion today. I have to go back and wait for him. She glanced at the man and motioned for him to carry her down. Mo Wushang turned his back indifferently. What do you want? Shen Yueji leapt in front of him in 2 steps and looked straight at his frosty face. Forget it if you don't want to say anything. It's not like I can't go down myself. Shen Yueji didn't care. She closed her eyes and jumped down. It was all his fault if she fell and became handicapped. It was as if she knew that the man would hold her, so Shen Yueji jumped without hesitation. She just felt her body falling down, and the next second, her waist was held by the man. She opened her eyes and met the man's dark eyes. They were as bright as stars. Mo Wushang held her firmly in his arms. His cold voice was hoarse as he buried his head in her neck. I want everything of you. But you are not obedient. I am obedient. You always force me. The man's Adam's apple moved and his handsome face rubbed against her neck. I didn't force you. Yes. No. Yes. If Jia says yes, then yes. Shen Yueji was satisfied that she had the upper hand in words. She leaned in the man's arms and was as obedient as a kitten. Do you know how much money my parents gave me? I asked you to snatch it back for me, but you just threw the money to those people. If I knew you were like this, I wouldn't have asked you to snatch it from Shuangshi's arms. She could just go back and give it to Shuangshi. Jia, yes. Money is just a worldly possession. What? You. If you have me, then you have everything. The man carefully rubbed her neck with his crimson lips, enjoying the tenderness and sweetness inside. Everything I have is yours. Shen Yueji blushed and pushed his head away. My mother often said that a man's mouth is a liar. I did not lie to you. Whether or not you're lying to me is not something that you can just say with your mouth. I'm already tired of hearing such promises. Anyone would be able to say that. Shen Yueji pushed him away and sat alone on the roof. Her heart was in a mess after Mo Wushang's antics, and she no longer had the mood to continue playing. Just like that, the two of them sat silently for a while. Shen Yueji saw Shangguan Yu's slender figure flash into the alley. Shuangshi was hugging the silver and crying to herself. Seeing a white brocade robe in front of her, she raised her head with tears in her eyes. When she saw Shangguan Yu's handsome, warm, and somewhat evil face, she didn't know if it was an illusion, but the evil aura that flashed by made her feel like she was seeing things. Young Master Shangguan, she sobbed. Not seeing Shen Yueji, Shangguan Yu frowned. Shuangshi, where's your miss? Miss, Shuangshi continued sobbing. Young Master Shangguan, don't worry. Miss is fine, but I have something. Chapter 238. Silver. Silver. I don't know which bastard stole all the silver that the regent gave me. Double happiness hugged her empty arms, as if the warmth of the silver was still there. Why was her life so bitter? She had finally gotten so much silver, enough for her to live a carefree and happy life for so long. Suddenly, it was gone. Everything was gone. Sob, sob, sob. It was so sad. The regent. Mo Wushang. Shangguan Yu's gentle face suddenly changed. He had seen Jia's feelings for Mo Wushang all these years. Seeing his beloved woman throwing herself at that man, he couldn't tell what he was feeling in his heart. After she entered the palace, he thought she had already given up on Mo Wushang. He didn't expect that she would be with him again. Shangguan Yu couldn't help but clench his fists under his robe. There was a layer of coldness on his handsome face, but when Shuangshi looked at him, he quickly hid the coldness and smiled at Shuangshi. Where did the regent take Jia? Young Master Shangguan, don't go. I don't know what's wrong with the regent recently. He's been very nice to my miss. He must have taken her to some interesting place. I'm afraid that young Master Shangguan will go after her. Miss is fine, but I'm afraid that the regent. After all, Mo Wushang was famous for being cold and bloodthirsty in the whole Feng country. She was afraid that if Shangguan Yu went after her, it would be dangerous. Shangguan Yu obviously didn't think so. Double happiness, I brought your miss out of the mansion. I should bring her back. But Double Happiness was hesitant. Looking at Shangguan Yu's expectant eyes, she stamped her feet and said, "Young Master Shangguan, I'll tell you the truth. Although I like your love for Miss for so many years, I think you're the best man in the world and worthy of Miss's lifelong commitment. But this servant is just a servant girl after all, and cannot control Miss's thoughts. What this servant can do is, whoever Miss likes, this servant will do my best to help Miss Young Master Shangguan, you've seen it. Whether it's in the past or now, Miss has never treated you as a man and a woman, including now. When we were in the mansion today, I've already asked Miss about it." Miss's reply was firm and decisive. She felt that young Master Shangguan deserved better. Shangguan Yu didn't doubt her words at all. Shuangxi was her maid, so he knew that Shen Yueji must have told her this personally. For a moment, he almost couldn't breathe. His face was as white as a sheet of paper. At this moment, it was as if a gust of wind could blow and he would fall to the ground powerlessly. Even so, he did not give up and continued to ask, "These were all personally told by your young Miss Double Happiness?" Didn't dare to look at his injured face. Emotionally, even Double Happiness felt that her young miss had gone too far. Young Master Shangguan was such a good person, but her young miss hurt him from time to time. In the past, she beat him, scolded him, and humiliated him. Although she didn't beat him or scold him anymore, if she was decisive, she might as well have beaten him and humiliated him in the past. However, the other party was her young Miss Double Happiness couldn't do anything. Although she sympathized with Shangguan Yu, her heart was biased towards her young miss. She was biased towards her young miss like a mountain. Chapter 239. The Prince Regent can compete with the Emperor, but young Master Shangguan, you are the Emperor's subjects and people. If you do this, you will implicate the whole Shangguan family. Double Happiness said a lot to him, but Shangguan Yu didn't listen to a word. He staggered and turned to leave. His back was unprecedentedly lonely. Double Happiness wanted to stop him, but the words were on the tip of her tongue. She wasn't her mistress, so what was the use of calling him? Moreover, she was the one who should be sad at this moment. She hugged herself and squatted on the ground again, crying. Her silver, sob sob sob, which damned bastard dared to steal her silver, sob sob sob. Shangguan Yu walked for a long, long time. For such a long time, from day to night, he didn't know where he was. He went back and forth, stopped and walked. Unknowingly, he had gone back and forth in the huge capital, going in circles for so long. He raised his head and looked at the drunken joy house in front of him, which was surrounded by lights and ambiguous atmosphere. He stopped here and stared at the plaque of the Drunken Joy House for a long time. The Drunken Joy House was the largest brothel in the capital. It was full of business day and night, and never stopped. Whether it was day or night, there seemed to be endless people coming and going. From inside came the sounds of laughter, the delicate voice of a woman, and the laughter of a man who was laughing wantonly. For some reason, the legs that stopped seemed to be attracted by a magic force, and he stepped into the Drunken Joy House. He had never been to such a place before. This was the first time. Inside, there were all kinds of women dressed in revealing clothes. Compared with the restraint and poetry writing in the daytime, they seemed to be a lot bolder at night. They didn't wear much clothes, only covering their private parts. Their arms were around the men next to them. Their red lips, snow-white skin, every part made one's imagination run wild. Shangguan Yu's eyes glanced at each other. At this time, an old mother who was over her middle age and still dressed beautifully came towards him. She couldn't hide the amazement in her eyes. She didn't expect such an outstanding child to come to her place in the middle of the night. "Young master, are you lonely at night and come to our Drunken Joy House to have fun?" Shangguan Yu did not answer. The old mother was also a sharp-eyed person. Just by looking at his outstanding temperament and expensive clothes, she knew that he was definitely a young master of an aristocratic family. Qiu Yang is a new girl that our Drunken Joy brothel has recruited. To be honest, she has not been married yet. 3 days later, we are planning to auction her. Since young master is here, then I'll make the decision on my own and let this girl serve you first. How about it? Shangguan Yu did not refuse, but took out a large ingot of silver from his sleeve and gave it to her. When the old mother saw that he was so generous, She was glad that she was right. She happily took the silver and said, "Young master, please come with me. I will lead you to your room." Shangguan Yu followed her upstairs. The lively and fragrant room was filled with an ambiguous atmosphere. Even the incense stimulated the body's most instinctive desire. Red curtains, red bed, it was an alluring fragrance. Shangguan Yu didn't know why he was here. As long as he thought of what Shuangshi had said to him today, he couldn't catch his breath. The suffocating pain seemed to dissipate a lot as he entered the room. Chapter 240. Soon, the door was pushed open, and a beautiful woman shyly walked in. She was dressed in a pink gauze, and her thin waist could be grasped by a single hand. If a large hand exerted force, it would be easily crushed. Her lips were red, her teeth were white, and her eyebrows were arched like willow leaves. Especially that pink little mouth, it could simply be described as tender and alluring. Compared with the arrogant and domineering Xinyueji, she seemed to be full of the unique charm of a woman. Young master, she thought her mother was lying to her, saying that it was a handsome young man. She didn't believe it, and refused to come. However, she didn't expect that the young master in front of her was really as handsome as a celestial being. Her heart was beating fast. The women who came here to serve the guests were not chosen by her, but it was her first time after all. Which woman didn't want to give her first time to a man she liked? If she could give her first night to him. Qiu Yang thought of what was about to happen and her face turned red. She hurriedly walked to the tea table and poured 2 cups of wine. Then, she leisurely walked towards the handsome young man sitting on the bed. "Young master, I'm Qiu Yang. Here's a toast to you." Shangguan Yu didn't need to look down to know that there was something in the wine. All the guests who came here knew what would happen when they entered this room, so every place in this room was prepared for the guests. Shangguan Yu stared at her for a long time without hiding his eyes. Qiu Yang blushed and lowered her head, trying to make herself say something bold. "Young master, don't worry. Later on the bed, I'll let you see enough." Such bold words made Shangguan Yu's eyes dim. He took the wine from her white fingers and drank it in one gulp. Seeing that he had drunk the wine, Qiu Yang also drank the wine in one gulp. She put down the wine cup and slowly moved her body along the man's thigh. A pair of warm hands slowly moved up from his thigh. "Young master, let me serve you from now on." Shangguan Yu did not move, nor did he resist. He just let her hold him, let her hands casually fan the flames on his body, like a statue. Maybe this was what Xinyueji wanted. Perhaps this was the kind of life he should have. He should learn from other men and have 3 wives and 4 concubines. After he had enough of the life in the mansion, he would come to the brothel to seek pleasure and repeat the cycle. His heart turned cold as he allowed the woman to touch him all over. She wrapped her body around him like a loach, and her soft little hands went through his clothes, slithering into his body and climbing up his masculinity. He was startled. Qiu Yang blushed and pushed the man onto the bed. She took off her clothes. The outer cover was just a symbol of pretense and modesty, but she was really not wearing a single inch inside. The young girl's delicate body was as exquisite as a pearl. Any man who saw her would probably be unable to restrain himself. However, Shangguan Yu's eyes were as calm as still water. Even the thing in Qiu Yang's hand did not seem to be moved by her at all. She was unwilling to give up. Her almond-shaped eyes were filled with tears. "Young master, do you think that I feel that I can't make you feel comfortable?" Shangguan Yu gently raised his hand and gently wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes. He turned over and pressed her under his body. Qiu Yang couldn't hide the joy on her face. She hurriedly took off his clothes. His robe was easily taken off by her. Shangguan Yu looked down at her delicate mouth, and his Adam's apple moved slightly. Chapter 241. Compared with the concubines and wives of the so-called manners, they were indeed not as bold as the women in the brothel. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many men who would abandon their beautiful wives and family members at home and still come to the brothel to seek pleasure. It was all because they would never be able to experience what it meant to be truly seductive when it came to their own women. They would rather die than live. Shangguan Yu stared at the girl's fragrant lips in a daze. However, At the moment when her lips were about to touch his, the unfamiliar woman's breath and Shin Yueji's arrogant and domineering face appeared in his mind. Bursts of nausea made him turn his head away and throw the woman out of the bed. Bang! A loud sound rang out. Qiu Yang's delicate body fell to the ground with a muffled groan. Her fair and tender body immediately turned red when she fell to the ground. She immediately burst into tears because of the pain. Puzzled and distressed, she looked at the indifferent man who was elegantly dressing himself on the bed. His every movement revealed a noble demeanor. Young master. Why? She felt so wronged that tears rolled down her cheeks one after another. Shangguan, you did not look at her. He just took her clothes and put them on her. Then, he took out a large ingot of silver from the elegant robe and gave it to her. Before leaving, he only said, "You are not her." Walking out of the Drunken Joy building, Shangguan Yu did not look back again. In the cold wind and the dark night, he seemed to have recovered some of his senses as the cold wind blew on his face. There was a trace of indelible coldness on his warm thin lips, and even his dark eyes were like owls. Shin Yueji's beautiful face appeared in front of him again. Shangguan Yu laughed at himself. Jia, do you know? Apart from you, I don't have the slightest interest in other women. How can I marry someone else? Even though he had forced himself to touch that woman just now, from the moment that woman entered the room, or from the moment he saw the words Drunken Joy House, his heart was already very conflicted. Especially when that woman boldly leaned her body against his leg, he wanted to kill her, but he still endured it. He endured it with great difficulty, not even daring to move, because he was afraid that if he moved even the slightest bit, in the next second, the one lying on the ground would be a cold corpse. He sighed silently, raised his head, and looked at the cold moon hanging high in the sky. You've always disliked weak men. I've always been working hard to make myself stronger. I gave up my studies for martial arts. No matter how much suffering I've endured, as long as I think about being able to protect you in the future and stand by your side, I feel that everything I've done is worth it. But you never gave me a chance, not even now. Now, he just wanted to silently guard and protect her. Even if he could not get a response from her, he was willing to do so, but she even wanted to take back this little bit. General's mansion compared to the coldness of the night, the general's mansion at this moment was bustling, as usual. Mo Wushang sat on the main seat, and on his right sat old General Shun Shun, whose face was red from drinking. Chapter 242. The servants who understood Mo Wushang's character were so scared that they didn't even dare to breathe. They all lowered their heads and didn't dare to speak. Only Shin Yueji sat in the corner and listened to Shun his nonsense. Her mouth twitched. She and Mo Wushang didn't even have anything to do with each other. This Shun, he was too quick to hug her thighs. He was already addressing her as son-in-law. The key point was that the man seemed to enjoy this title very much and was willing to be taken advantage of. The cold aura around his body had long since disappeared like the cold moon. He took the wine that Shun he handed him and drank it in one gulp. He looked like a good son-in-law who was obedient and attentive. Shin Yueji's eyes hurt. She closed her eyes and ate her food, treating them as air. Shin Yu Kai had been back for a long time. He was travel-worn. Before he could talk to his dear little sister about the pain of lovesickness, he was dragged to eat by the servants of the residence, saying that the Prince Regent was here. He bit his chopsticks and stuffed rice into his mouth. From time to time, he looked up at Shin Yueji with tears in his eyes. He had been away from home for 4 to 5 days. Not only did his parents not like him, they even asked him why he came back so quickly. Even his little sister. Her heart was hooked by a certain Prince Regent and she didn't even look at him. Feeling Shin Yueji's gaze, Shin Yueji looked up and glanced in his direction. Shin Yu Kai was so excited that he immediately put a big piece of chicken leg in her arms and grinned at her. Shin Yueji, she stuffed the chicken leg in the bowl back to him in disgust. Shin Yu Kai was overwhelmed by the favor. He immediately stuffed the drumstick into his mouth and chewed it. Sob sob. His little sister really loved him too much. He knew that she didn't forget to stuff him with a chicken leg when he was tired from being away for 4 to 5 days. Feeling another sharp gaze on her head, Shin Yueji didn't dare to eat quietly. She silently picked up a piece of vegetable and put it into Mo Wushang's bowl from a distance. Mo Wushang had been toasting with Shun He since he came to the table. He drank a few mouthfuls of wine but didn't eat a bite. Seeing Shun Yueji put food in his bowl, he reluctantly moved his chopsticks. He ate the food she put in his bowl. Shun Yu Kai was very excited. Moreover, he was her little sister's first love. Look at this treatment. She only gave him meat and vegetables. The grievances he had suffered upon returning to the residence immediately vanished into thin air. He recalled what Ji Chu had told him before. Ever since she died, she had only been drinking and had not eaten anything. That pale, lonely, and cold face indeed looked much thinner than when they had first met. Shun Yueji's heart skipped a beat. She picked up more food for him with her chopsticks. Don't just drink. Eat more. Mo Wushang obediently ate all the food that she picked up with her chopsticks, leaving only the rice in his bowl untouched. Why are you only eating vegetables? The man's gaze shifted to her half-eaten bowl. There were still a lot of leftovers left. She didn't look like she had any appetite, but the man's gaze was fixed on her. I want to eat your bowl. Without waiting for Shun Yueji to react, Mother Shun and Father Shun happily took the bowl of rice in front of Shun Yueji and placed it in front of Mo Wushang. Chapter 243. Shun Yueji wiped the cold sweat off her forehead. She couldn't bear to look at the leftovers she had eaten. Since Mo Wushang didn't mind, she would just let him eat until he died. But Shun, his way of addressing him, Father. What kind of position do you place the emperor in? She silently picked a few pieces of meat into Mo Wushang's bowl and a few pieces of vegetables, taking away the rice that he hadn't touched. Shun Yueji didn't look at the man's expression and focused on eating. Wu Shu looked up and saw Mo Wushang eating with relish in her bowl as if it was a delicious delicacy. She, on the other hand, was eating the rice in her bowl as if it was tasteless. Shun Yu Kai put another big piece of fat meat into her bowl. Shun Yueji almost vomited when she saw the oily and fishy piece of meat. She didn't say anything and returned the meat to him. Shun Yu Kai happily nibbled on the fat meat and smiled foolishly. His little sister really doted on him. Shun Yueji felt awkward and depressed during the meal. When she was finally full, she wanted to find an excuse to run away. Your mother has ordered the maids to tidy up your room after you left. Since the regent rarely comes, he will sleep in the same room as you. Father Shun said. Shun Yueji wanted to cry but had no tears. Father, I am the imperial consort. Father Shun took a bite of the chicken leg and mumbled, Father knows, Father knows. But the regent is not the emperor. It's the same, what's the same? She continued to cry. It's my son-in-law. Equals. Shun Yueji stood up from her seat with her head lowered. She caught Mo Wushang's gaze and saw a smile in his dark and cold eyes. But she glared back at him fiercely. He immediately stopped smiling and continued to eat, as if the scene just now was an illusion of Shun Yueji's. Seeing his little sister leave, Shun Yu Kai ate a few mouthfuls and put down his chopsticks. Father, Mother, I'm full too. I'm leaving. It was so quiet that no one paid attention to him. He looked at his parents attentively warming up the man sitting on the main seat. He gritted his teeth and said in grief, Father, Mother. Mother Shun turned around and glared at him. If you want to leave, then leave. What are you yelling about? Don't you see your brother-in-law here? Shun Yu Kai was speechless. That's my brother-in-law, okay? Seeing what he was thinking, Mother Shun glared at him. How can the regent be a concubine? From tomorrow onwards, will be your elder sister. Shun Yu Kai, it's rare for the regent to visit the general's mansion. It just so happens that won't be returning to the palace these few days. You must stay in the mansion for a few more days. Otherwise, will be bored alone. Mother Shun smiled. Yes, this old man only has one daughter. I am very gratified to hear Double Happiness talk about the regent and Ji's glorious deeds in the palace. The Shun father happily takes a big gulp of wine. Mo Wushang's handsome face became a little absent-minded after Shun Yueji left. He returned to his previous indifferent look. He indifferently pushed away the wine cup that Shun He pushed towards him. I heard that Ji and the eldest young master of the Shangguan family went out to play today? There's no such thing, there's no such thing. It's just a coincidence. Yu's father and this official have been old friends for many years. Since he's here, this official has to do his best as a host. This official has asked Double Happiness to prepare the money in advance. We're waiting for the future to clear our relationship. Regent, please don't misunderstand. The Shun father hurriedly explained. Shun Yukai listened to them with a headache. After waiting for a long time, knowing that his two parents would not pay attention to him, he left with a sad face. Before he left, he accidentally bumped into a stool and made a loud noise. He didn't even have time to cry out in pain. Chapter 244. Kailan Courtyard was Shun Yuechi's residence. After Shun Yueji left the dinner table, she went straight to his residence. She thought that after Shun Yukai came back, he would arrange for Li Yingying to stay with him. In the end, she turned the entire Kailan Courtyard upside down and didn't even miss the bottom of the bed. Not to mention Li Yingying's shadow, there wasn't even a hair of a woman. She randomly caught a maid from Kailan Courtyard and found out that Li Yingying wasn't arranged to stay here at all. Shun Yueji let out a long breath. She didn't know if it was because of anger or something else. She sat on the bed panting. She should have known Shun Yuechi's character. He never played his cards according to the rules, but she still foolishly came here to look for him. Double Happiness. Hey, Miss Double Happiness came in with a burp. Shun Yueji squinted at her. According to your understanding of Big Brother, where do you think he will arrange for Li Yingying? The woodshed, the little dark room, any scary place is possible. Double Happiness answered without thinking. Shun Yueji, after a long time, she moved her lips and spat out two words. The reason? Think about it, miss. You originally gave young master a deadline of about 3 days. Young master wants to please you so much. As long as he can make it in time, he will definitely rush back. However, he dragged on for 4 to 5 days on the road. This must be Li Yingying's doing. She must have played some tricks on the road. Otherwise, young master wouldn't have come back so late. Any woman other than Miss, as long as they offend young master is very vengeful. He must have locked Li Yingying in the little dark room. Shun Yueji. Somehow, she felt that what Double Happiness said made sense. In our general's residence, which place is the blackest? The scariest? Double Happiness scratched her head and thought seriously for a while. It seems to be in young master's backyard. Backyard? Shun Yueji's mouth twitched. She didn't ask Double Happiness for the reason. Instead, she got up and walked towards the backyard of Kailan Courtyard. As the name suggested, she didn't know much about Shun Yuechi's backyard in her memory. When they really entered the backyard of Kailan Courtyard, 3 black lines appeared on Shun Yueji's head. How was this a backyard? This was clearly a shady inn. It was one thing for other people to have flowers and trees in their backyard, but he had snakes in his backyard. Not only that, he had black rats and big spiders running all over the place. Taking a symbolic step back, Shun Yueji thought of a certain woman who was likely to be locked up here, and her face completely darkened. Did she not kill her on the way here, so she brought her back to scare her to death? Miss, don't be afraid. These little bastards have memories. You are their master, they won't hurt you. Seeing her step back, Shuangxi thought that since she hadn't been back for so long, Miss had forgotten about these strange things. Hearing this, Shun Yueji looked at her gloomily. Although eldest young master raised these things well, eldest young master raised them for you, young miss. He's just waiting for someone to bully young miss. He'll throw a snake, a rat, and a spider into their house to scare them. She walked past the little fellows who took the initiative to make way for her. They were densely packed and filled the entire garden. Shun Yueji walked inside. Let's go find Miss Li first. Chapter 245. This was indeed a good and powerful way to take revenge. But when Shun Yueji went to open the door, she found a room full of green, black, and yellow snakes. They formed a circle and were sticking out their tongues at her. When she was alive, She was afraid of snakes. After experiencing so many things after death, she was less afraid of snakes. But seeing so many snakes coming out at once, her heart still beat with fear. Almost instinctively, she retreated. With the previous example, Shinyueji didn't rush to open the other doors. Instead, she chose a distance and opened it slowly. When she saw a group of black spiders coming out of the room, she hurriedly closed the door and stopped them from coming out. In another room, she took a deep breath and opened the door a little. Sure enough, a group of rats was already waiting in the room. They were just waiting for her to open the door so that they could rush out. Shinyueji felt like she was going crazy. She knew that Shinyu Kai was a weirdo, but she didn't expect her to be this weird. She raised a bunch of disgusting things. Her face was a little pale. I've searched all the rooms. Where are Li Yingying and the others? Also, snakes were cold-blooded animals. Among the snakes, many of them were much longer than her height. Double Happiness said that they recognized her as their master. During the period when she was here, they avoided her. But Li Yingying was different. She was a stranger to them. This Shinyu Kai was too ridiculous. She was treated like this. Those daughters of aristocratic families were delicate and not her. Even if it was her previous self, she would have been scared to death. Double Happiness saw that she didn't look good and quickly pulled her hand. Miss, please follow me. I should know where they are. Double Happiness pulled her all the way forward and finally stopped under a big tree. Miss, it should be here. There was nothing but a big tree. Shinyueji squinted and looked up and down. Here. Miss, look. Double Happiness pointed at a flat and smooth piece of land. She stepped forward and kicked it a few times, making a muffled sound. Almost as soon as she pulled her foot back, she heard a hoarse cry that revealed a strong sense of fear. Is anyone there? Help, hurry up and save me, sob sob. Hearing this, Shinyueji did not dare to hesitate any longer. She quickly bent down and lifted the layer of things on top. It was a small hole that was neither too big nor too small. After the top was lifted, it could be clearly seen that in the small pit, there were two shivering little bodies hugging each other. As for the little servant girl who was screaming hysterically, her face was deathly pale and her cheeks were covered with hot tears. Her pale little face was even more terrifying than a dead person. Shinyueji did not say anything else. She only ordered Double Happiness to get someone to pull them out. Shuang she pulled with some difficulty. Almost as soon as she got up, she saw the maidservant put her hands on her waist, pointed at Shinyueji's nose and scolded, "What's wrong with you? Is this how you treat my young miss by inviting her over? To think that you're from a prestigious family. Quickly apologize to my young miss." Shinyueji frowned in the face of the little servant girl's anger. This servant girl had no manners at all. She couldn't even tell who was who. Chapter 246. Qiao Yu. Li Yingying's pale lips were bloodless. She watched as Qiao Yu's thin body, like a kite with a broken string, fell uncontrollably into the deep pit. Then she saw a bunch of strange things crawling towards her direction. She screamed in fear and covered her face. "Don't come over, don't come over." This was the first time Shinyueji saw Li Yingying's appearance after so long. She had heard of it before, but she had never seen it. It could be said that this was the first time. Her lips were red and her teeth were white. Her figure was slender. She was dressed in white like a fairy. Her pale cheeks and familiar contours were very similar to her previous self. Even if she were to stand here in person, she would only need to dress up a little and dress up according to her past self, and she would at least be 90% identical. She shed tears. "Why do you treat me so cruelly? If you didn't sincerely invite me to the palace, why do you have to tease me like this? I have never offended you. Qiao Yu has been with me since she was a child. We are like sisters. How can you treat her like this? Quickly pull her up. How dare you yell at the imperial concubine and insult her? Li Yingying, this maidservant of yours is not small." "What did you say?" Li Yingying's eyes widened at Shinyueji's words. She stared at Shinyueji for a long time. She suddenly bowed down and kowtowed. "This servant's daughter has eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. I have offended the imperial concubine. I hope the imperial concubine will forgive me. Whether it was Xiao Yu or herself, they didn't expect that Shen Yueji, who was far away in the palace, would suddenly appear in the general's mansion. Otherwise, Xiao Yu would not dare to speak so presumptuously. Shen Yueji glanced at her indifferently and withdrew her gaze. Double happiness, pull her out. Take Miss Li to freshen up and then come see me. Yes, miss. Sitting on Shen Yueji's bed, Shen Yueji frowned. In fact, the courtyard next to Shen Yueji's was her residence. The reason why her residence was so close to Shen Yueji's was because she cried and tried to hang herself 3 times. Shen Yukai went to her courtyard to look for her, but he couldn't find her. In the end, he was told that his little sister went to his residence, which made him very happy. When he saw Shen Yueji sitting in the room with a cold face, his smile froze on his face, like a child who had done something wrong. After hesitating outside the door for a while, he slowly walked towards her. Big Brother went to the Central Plains and should have returned in 3 days. Why did he only return after 5 days? As soon as Shen Yueji saw him, she asked straightforwardly. Shen Yukai sat down beside her. It's all that Li Yingying's fault. She kept coming back and forth, saying that she couldn't get used to Jinzhu's steamed buns and that she had a serious illness due to the poor climate. She asked me to get a doctor to treat her, but that wasn't all. Whenever she wasn't satisfied with anything, she would start crying, as if I was the one who bullied her. If it weren't for you, I would have already left in shame. I don't care if she's dead or alive. Do you know how much I've suffered these past few days? Speaking of his grievances, Shen Yukai couldn't help but cry. He tugged at Shen Yueji's sleeve with a bashful face, and winked at her. Little sister, how are you going to make it up to me? Chapter 247. I didn't scare them. I just wanted to teach them a lesson. Li Yingying and the others are women, and they are delicate ladies. Shen Yueji held her forehead and said, Do you know that you almost scared them to death? Shen Yukai snorted and said, I left the capital for nearly 5 days for my little sister, and I suffered from lovesickness every day. But my little sister scolded you as soon as she came back. She didn't care about the grievances you suffered these days, but cared about others. Shen Yueji looked at him speechlessly and got up to leave. Little sister, you really don't love me anymore. However, as soon as she took a step, her leg was hugged. Shen Yueji's mouth twitched as she looked at the man who was lying on the ground and crying while hugging her leg without caring about his image. What are you doing? You flirted with the Prince Regent to drive away the cold and warm him up. You even gave him food and he ate your rice. You can't do this. I feel so sorry for you. You didn't even let me eat your leftovers. Shen Yueji rolled her eyes speechlessly and stretched out her foot to kick him. He didn't move. She looked down at him and said, Do you mean that letting you eat leftovers is for your own good? Shen Yukai nodded wildly. Go away. With a fierce kick, Shen Yueji's body became so weak that he rolled on the ground. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the little figure had walked away without any intention of helping him up. He rolled back, hugged her leg, and continued to cry, didn't you see that I've lost weight because I missed you? Why are you so heartless? You didn't talk to me for a while and went to find someone else. Shen Yueji seriously realized that she shouldn't have waited for him to come back and asked about Li Yingying's behavior along the way. If she had known that Shen Yukai was so difficult, she would have gone back directly after finding him. I still have something to say to Li Yingying. Brother, are you deliberately embarrassing me by hugging me like this? Hearing this, Shen Yukai quickly let go of her and got up from the ground. I'll go with my little sister. I'll let you see how annoying Li Yingying is. Shen Yueji only glanced at him and said nothing. In front of Shen Yukai, she had an ulterior motive, which was why she acted like that. However, in front of Shen Yukai, she didn't dare to do so. Thinking of this, Shen Yueji had another headache. How was her brother going to get a wife in the future? Jilan Courtyard and Kailan Courtyard were both named after them. Shen Yueji was reluctant when she found out that her residence was named after such a place. Miss, this servant has taken care of them. Double Happiness came out and greeted Shen Yueji respectfully when he saw her. Little Joy. As soon as Shen Yukai saw her, she immediately shouted. Hearing this familiar voice and address, She instantly burst into tears. Young master. The two of them opened their arms and ran toward each other. They looked like lovers who had only seen each other once in a few hundred years. Yueji's mouth twitched as she stood between them. Who would have thought that the two of them would let her go, one on the left and one on the right, and embrace each other tightly? Yueji, ignoring the two of them, Yueji stepped into the room. Young master, I haven't seen you in a few months. You've lost a lot of weight. Chapter 248. That's right. The food in the palace is good and the clothes are warm. I've gained a few kilograms. That's good. I'm glad that you look better when you're chubbier. Eldest young master is the same. When you slim down, you look handsome and suave. Is that so? I'll eat less in the future and try my best to slim down. Eldest young master, you have to take care of your health while eating less. Don't let Madam and the General force you to eat like you used to. Li Yingying, who was sitting on a round chair, poured tea for her. Yueji's mind was completely attracted by the chatter of the two people outside. Wu Shu recovered from his daze and looked at the delicate Li Yingying before him. I heard that Miss Li has been making things difficult for my big brother on the way here. Li Yingying's face turned pale. Qiaoyu, who was standing beside her, hurriedly said, Your Highness, it's not what you think. It's just that this is the first time Miss Li has traveled far. Miss Li has a kind heart. When she was bullied in the residence, it was all thanks to the care of the old couple in the Zhong province. Miss Li is just afraid. She's worried about the safety of others when she can't even protect herself. That's kind-hearted. Yueji's lips curled into a faint smile. Li Yingying bit her lower lip when she heard the meaning behind Yueji's words. Tears welled up in her eyes. As Yueji put down the teacup in her hand, her tears were forced back. As a fellow woman, this consort believes that I can see through Miss Li's thoughts. It was true that all men liked weak and sickly women. This would give rise to a desire to protect them. But, she sneered, the general's residence is a family of generals. Isn't it a waste to use those weak and scheming women on us? Moreover, speaking to this point, she elegantly and slowly took a sip of tea. Eldest brother has always been stupid when it comes to matters of the heart. He also doesn't like delicate girls like Miss Li. I'm afraid that Miss Li's intentions have been used on the wrong person. In just a few words, she had seen through the thoughts in her heart. Li Yingying's pale face regained some color. She knelt on the ground. Many thanks for Guifei's reminder. This subject will definitely not have such thoughts in the future. No, you still have to think about it, but don't put it on my general's mansion. Compared to the general's mansion, Miss Li seems to only know that I called you into the palace because I lack a servant girl. But why don't you think about it? I don't know you at all, so why did I specifically ask you to come into the palace to serve me? Your Highness. Compared to the general's mansion, don't you think that the imperial palace is where you belong? Looking at Li Yingying's shocked and unbelievable face, she probably couldn't imagine that in this world, there was actually someone who was willing to send a woman to fight for her man's favor. Based on Yueji's appearance, she was a woman who could tempt any woman. She didn't need to. Although Li Yingying had thought about this before, she quickly rejected it. She didn't expect that her previous guess was actually true. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.